Hello, this is OverlordBou, and we're back with SAT score, and today we'll be going over the basic guide of positioning. So we'll be going over basic positioning for battleships, cruisers, and Ds in this video. So we'll be watching a replay, and I'll be letting SAT score cover this since he's a lot better at explaining these sort of things compared to me. So we're just going to hop right into the match, and I'll let him cover it from there.
So keep in mind, positioning is is a very complicated tactic, and we can spend all day just talking about how to properly position ships. But for the sake of time and simplicity, we're just going to cover some of the more basic concepts so you can position better in games. And as you figure out how your ship works and more, then you can try to find more better positioning tailored to your ship. So in this match, we have a Kid, which is a US destroyer, a Cross of Dorn, and we have a Lenin as our battleship. So probably one of the most basic positionings, basic positions you can take is have a destroyer up front. The destroyer will be providing the spotting, so he needs to be up front and trying to fight the other destroyer for control spotting. Backing him up will be the cruiser. So you can stay. The cruiser can be. Ideally, the cruiser wants to be close enough where you can get your shots in, but also far enough that you don't. You can mitigate the damage you take and disengage when needed. So in this case, I'm going to actually use my Kid and provide smoke. This way, Bo's Cross of Dorn could get a little bit closer without worrying. And he can also he'll provide cover for me whenever I spot something, and he can farm for relative safety. Since this won't happen in most of your matches, what you will probably do is just have your cruiser go into a kiting position somewhere near around here. When you get spotted, you want to be turned away, i.e. you want to be having your aft face them. Because if you're stuck bow in, you're might be forced to make a turn, which will expose your broadside in order to escape. Our Lenin also is a little bit further back, but his role in the beginning is to try to get shots on other cruisers and battleships trying to make the cross. And if there's a destroyer that's close enough, he can take a shot as well. So that's why he hasn't come over to our flank just yet. He's gonna just kind of sit in the middle and see where the enemy is gonna go. So here we have Bo sitting in smoke, and me, I will be going up to provide spotting. When you're a destroyer, you have to make a balance between being basically you want to be aggressive enough so you can get spotting. So here, I am able to spot the battleship that's just coming in. In fact, I'm spotting two right here. But if you're too aggressive and you run into the enemy destroyer, you want to make sure you have an escape route. Most destroyers do not have a heal, so if you're forced to invest too much HP and you lose some in the process, that will make spotting a lot harder. What I'm trying to get at is, for destroyers, HP is fairly important when it comes to spotting. For example, would you want to spot a ship with a low health destroyer, risking the fact that if you run into another enemy destroyer, he could just kill you outright?
No.
So, yes. So basically, you want to be careful with your HP management when it comes to positioning, because one of the general facts of positioning is your positioning is going to be determined by how much HP you can invest. So since Bo is still at full HP, he can afford to get a little bit closer. Even if he takes a Citadel hit, he still has enough HP to turn away and continue to be a threat. But let's say if Bo was at 5k HP, that means he would not risk going into combat without almost guaranteed not being spotting. So let's go back to the battleship, since I've forgot about him for a little bit. So Lenin could have done one of two things. He could be right beside us or a little bit behind us, just constantly pushing up with. because since there's no real opposition, he can just move up and take the space for free. So take a look at the general minimap. Right now, we figured out that there's no destroyers near us, so I can be fairly aggressive. The one destroyer that's nearby is the Mercurier, and I know my kid can outspot him. That means I can play aggressively. He can't, because of that spotting difference. I spot him, and he has to risk his HP, in which if Bo starts shooting at him, then he's gonna lose a lot very quickly. Or he has to turn away and give up ground. So, because that is why concealment is extremely important for destroyers, because the concealment difference alone can dictate a lot of the positioning. So, and since we know that the right side isn't doing so well, we're trying to play more aggressively in order to kill the enemies on our side quickly and go ahead and help the other side. So in this case, I've given Bo another smoke so he can farm from safety. And since, as you can tell, I'm pretty far up, I am spotting both destroyers. I've also happened to spot the enemy Mercurier. Down there in Lenin, you see, Lenin has actually not pushed up that much, and that's because he knows that there's a cruiser off to his right. So by staying there, he has to be very careful on his power projection, because we do want the battleships killed up north, but he also is sitting there to check the enemy's movement. That Salem cannot go around the corner because he knows once he does, Lenin is going to punch him in the face. And Salems don't like that generally. So after the first few minutes of the initial positioning, you want to just, once you understand what ships you're facing, then that's when you start like kind of customizing your positioning. Because here, you identify which is the most, what threats are important to you, which ones you can take care of quickly, etc., etc. So that's why we have our Lenin, or Barbarian, just sitting in B. So Salem there, since he's bow in, he cannot reverse quickly to engage us. And if he goes forward, he will go back into Barbarian 16-inch guns. So even if your positioning doesn't directly threaten the enemy, just threatening their movement is sometimes enough. Because now that Salem cannot make the play he wants to, and since Bo has gone around the side, he's starting to threaten his position. So what could have been a safe position for Salem is now under threat, because his flank is being attacked, and if he goes forward, he will go forward into a battleship at point blank range. So you want to play aggressively, but you don't want to play too aggressively. That is what that Salem does, but since he still has a lot of HP, he will try to run. And honestly, that is his best move, because if you look at how many ships are starting to swarm him, his initial position wasn't good to start with, but because his position was going to be encircled, that's going to lead to a obvious death. So he tried to escape, and Shima just kind of said no in that one. All right, so to summarize what I've been saying so far, in the beginning, your general position is going to come up to destroyers up in front, supported by the cruisers, and then usually the battleship. As you start to progress towards mid-game, it depends on what ships are healthy and what are not. This is where you can start seeing battleships take a more active role. Especially if you've been sitting on a lot of HP, you can start using that to push up and get into more important position. So here we have Barbarian. Even though he's taken some damage, he is starting to hold the middle. And by holding the middle, he has shots on anyone that is crossing in middle, which currently is about half the team. Not only can he shoot people in middle, but he can also switch his guns over to the left or to the right, depending on what side he thinks needs the most help. So this is kind of alluding to the Flammuth central positioning, because his guns can threaten everyone, pretty much everyone on the map. He's only limited on what targets are the most important to hit. And in this case, he is focusing on the Riga and the Akazuki. Bo, on the other hand, although his mains is full HP, the mines and actually many cruisers are not very... If they take a hit, they will take a lot of damage in the process. So while Bo looks healthy, you still have to play fairly cautiously. An errant battleship shell can easily take Citadel him and take him down 1/3 HP. So we're still doing the general destroyer in front, I'm doing the spotting, and he's following behind and providing firepower. And see, since I deployed that smoke there, that is going to block line of sight. So that is why Bo is going to rush in and try to use it as cover. Just keep in mind, once smoke screens tend to attract a lot of torpedoes. So you want to keep a close eye on what ships have, where the positions of enemy destroyers are. Because if they see a smoke screen, chances are they're going to start throwing torpedoes. Well, speaking of which, all right. So we'll go back to my go back to my destroyer positioning here, right here. So as I said before, I am playing the Kid. I can actually outspot both ships, except a Ragnar, and Ragnar is actually kind of an issue for me, but that's a little bit different. I can cover that a little bit later. Anyways, the Kid will outspot the Marceau no problem. The Ragnar is what I'm concerned about, because even though I outspot him, he can turn on his radar and negate that advantage, at least for about 30 seconds or so.
Enemy destroyer sunk.
So if you're playing a destroyer, you always want to be careful of what ships have radar. In this case, it will be the Ragnar. The Ragnar has radar. The Riga had radar, except he's dead. And I believe the Salem was carrying radar for that engagement. So when you're playing a destroyer and trying to position, you generally want to stay out of radar range of enemy ships. Especially here, since I have no smoke to disengage. In fact, I'm forced to use my heal to heal up. It's not the worst thing, since I know that I have to spend some HP in the game in order to kind of be relevant. But for most destroyers, you want to be careful. If you don't have smoke, you want to play more cautiously, because if without the smoke, you usually don't have a quick way to disengage. And if you open fire with your guns, that is 20 seconds of dodging, and you'll usually take a lot of damage in the process. Since I'm giving smoke for Bo, he can actually play a little bit closer. It's something you can do in divs, coordinating smokes with your destroyers in order to get closer and farm more damage. Since Bo right now is about 1/3 of HP, the only reason he can stay this close is actually because of that smoke. If, let's say, I wasn't playing a game and he was forced to play an open water cruiser, then his positioning will change. Instead of positioning right where he is at around D4, D5, he would have to position a lot farther, probably behind the A cap. And that is because he doesn't have the HP to effectively engage. At this range, North Carolina can easily hit him, and just a few shots is enough to kill him, especially if he lands a very lucky Citadel. So when you're trying to position, if you can use smoke to get closer, that is nice. But most of the time, you're generally going to have to rely on something like islands. So in theory, he could actually be somewhere in ACAP and try to shoot over the island to get to North Carolina. So when you're positioning, always try to use something that blocks line of sight. But if you can get closer to enemies without without being spotted, that allows you to get a sneak up on them for a more effective attack. Because if you can catch an enemy unaware and a very close range, you can usually get like a lot of damage when you hit their broadside, especially since they have no time to react. So since Bo is done farming this North Carolina, I'll go back and talk about the general battleship positioning. So as I said before, at the very beginning, he kind of positioned his battleship somewhere in the middle. We did not know how many people was on our side, so we didn't want to commit everyone to the left, because if we position everyone on a 1-2 line, that means we won't be able to affect the rest. Say like mid, we won't be able to affect the ships that position themselves in mid. So battleships, since he spawned on A, he just went south and kind of like had some good shots up north and to the right. So with the battleships, at the start, you want to kind of find a spot where you think enemies will cross and just kind of set up positions. So in the event they do get spotted, you can get guns on them very quickly. That is also why you saw him rotate to mid, because there was a lot of ships over at mid that he could shoot at. Since battleships will take a while to kill, and he can just back up behind the island, he did the smart thing and basically just put himself into the middle so he had shots on everyone. Since he didn't die, he is able to use the last of his HP and help challenge this Attago. So that is just kind of a general this is just kind of a general guide to positioning. So aside from the initial positioning, you want to play on your side. You want to have a destroyer up in front doing the spotting, cruiser behind to start taking pot shots at the enemies, and then the battleship kind of looking in that general area wherever the destroyers are, because the destroyers can provide spotting, and if you have your guns set up to look in that area, you can fire almost immediately as the enemies are spotted. That is when they're the most vulnerable. Later on, once you get into the mid game, then you need to start thinking about how is your flank doing, because if you can push up into the enemy side, that is a very strong position to take, since you can usually envelop the enemy. That is what happens to Salem, and why he went from full health to none relatively quickly, aside from the Shimakaze torpedoes. And even in the end, we still kind of maintain a general destroyer, cruiser, followed by cruiser. But the battleship in this case, if you have the HP, you can actually use that to take a more forward position, a more aggressive position, and start threatening enemies. So you kind of want to be aware of your concealment, and like one of the two most important things is your concealment and your HP. Those two are generally like your general indicators of how aggressive you can be in your positioning. I guess the third is just your relative strength compared to the enemies. Because if your side is relatively weak, you're going to probably play more in the back and being passive. But if your side is relatively strong, like you outnumber the enemies or the enemies have lower tier ships, then you can play more aggressively, try to push them off or get kills, and then push on from there. Bo, do you think anything else I should be covering regarding basic positioning?
Nope, I think you covered everything. You did a wonderful job. Thank you for all the help. Again, I'm not the best at explaining this kind of thing, so thankfully we have SA2 to help us out with that. So thank you so much for your time today, brother. But yep, if you guys have any questions or concerns, definitely leave them down in the comments down below. This is OverlordBou and SAT, and we'll talk to y'all later. Oh, big stretch, dude. Oh, big stretch, yeah.